Warm wishes to everybody for our new season of Happy Hours. You may not be aware, but today is actually our 110th since we kicked off our webinar program under lockdown, and many of you have been along with us on this virtual journey. But we've also started doing in-person events, and big thanks to everybody who was able to join us at our Leeds and our London events back in March. We had 2 successful annual conferences, and in fact at the Leeds event, Dr. Anna Dixon, who is the co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Housing and Care for Older People's current inquiry on creating intergenerational communities, was able to make an announcement about the new inquiry on intergenerational living, thinking about what that means for our communities. And we're delighted to follow up on that with this happy hour. And we've got a great cast available for you today who's going to provide lots of insights from different perspectives, both internationally and nationally, and slightly changed the order of the programme so that we can kick off with Savannah Fishel, who's a Churchill Travelling Fellow working on intergenerational from perspectives from internationally, but from the Innovation Unit. And she's going to be followed by the co-founder of Intergenerational England, who also is a member of the All-Party Parliamentary Group panel and is doing some fantastic works in the sector on intergenerational living. And then we'll hear from Cate Pemble, who's an impact research fellow at the University of Stirling. We're doing some fantastic work with Stirling on a number of projects. And Cate, you're going to be looking much more around intergenerational relationships and some of the things emerging from the research that Stirling and you have been doing. And last but not least, we're going to an award-winning practice based down in the southwest, and the work they're doing in a co-housing context in Bridport. Just I think announced last week or so to be a winner of the Pineapple Award, which I always thought was a studio, but I know Barefoot is a studio, but not a leisure studio. But also Sam was going to draw attention to the recent article that appeared in Sunday's Observer as well, when he presents on some of the fascinating work that's happening. So we're going to look at different aspects of intergenerational living, and we're going to kick off with Savannah. Savannah, really delighted that you could join us with your heavy schedule of events that you're taking place at the moment, and it's been wonderful to follow you and your progress through the Winston Churchill Travelling Fellowship. I think we first met probably over 2 years ago when it was still a germ of an idea. Well, how it's taken off fantastically. So over to you.
Thank you for having me, and happy hour. Just going to share my slides. So, as Jeremy just said, I'm Savannah. I am a public sector service designer with a background in health policy. I'm also a Churchill Fellow. So today I'm going to be sharing insights from my project, which explores intergenerational communal housing models. But before I kind of dive into the detail, I just want to tell you about one place that I visited. Santa Rosa Creek Commons in California has about 30 residents aged 0 to 80 years old, and they live in private homes, but there's a range of shared indoor and outdoor spaces which foster connection. So, for example, shared laundry, lots of garden space. It's a limited equity co-op, so homes aren't sold on the open market, keeping it affordable. Community life is reciprocal, from shared meals, spontaneous activities, and rallying together in times of need. For example, they organised 63 car rides for a member undergoing chemotherapy. When I was there, an older resident said to me that she's connected to everyone there. She said, "I know if I need something, people are there." So my Churchill Fellowship involved visiting 53 communities, a bit like this one, across Australia and the US. My scope was broad, so it included, for example, co-housing, which many of you might have heard of, urban and rural cooperatives, tiny home villages, eco-villages. I was guided by 2 central questions. Within increasingly individualistic societies, what intergenerational communal housing models exist and what benefits do they bring? And what are the conditions that help these intergenerational communities thrive? Like the UK, both the US and Australia are, like I said, highly individualistic countries. facing chronic loneliness, insecure housing, political polarization, and deep divides across age groups. I saw intergenerational living as an exciting, practical response to some of the most complex challenges that we face today around housing, health, and loneliness. Housing built with intentional, everyday interaction across ages has the potential to increase people's social and support networks, improve well-being, and relieve pressure on public services, all whilst creating eco-friendly living. So that's the why. What have I learned? Well, I've distilled the 6 key benefits of living communally here. So the first one, top right, sharing the load. So chore sharing, crisis support, childcare, things like that. One single dad said to me, if I get home late from work, there's always people here. It's like my daughter has lots of aunts and uncles. People watch out for each other. So for the parents listening, that might be quite a different kind of story being told there than people who live in more isolated living arrangements. So that was sharing the load. Second, sustainable resource use. So imagine a street where every home doesn't need its own car, its own lawnmower, its own washing machine, its own kids' toys. Third, health, well-being, and personal growth. So this is anything from cognitive engagement to neighbourly care to skill sharing. Next, affordability and convenience. So through collective purchasing and shared amenities. Although it is true that some communities are expensive, in my research output, which will be coming out this summer, I'm focused on communities which have affordability mechanisms built in. So this is possible, and I'll give examples later. Fifth, cultural enrichment and resilience. So, for instance, empathy, advice, cross-cutting age groups. And finally, of course, at the top, social connection, reducing isolation and building a sense of belonging. A common myth is that these communities are inward-looking. But in fact, the benefits often ripple outwards. So the last slide was focusing on benefits for residents, but I've become really interested in benefits for broader society. So these are things like strengthening local networks, stewarding green spaces, hosting events, facilitating education, providing that third space that's so often missing now from our communities. I don't have time to go through all of these now, but this is something I'm very interested in the way that communal living can catalyze change. So I do have an article coming out later on this, and there'll be more information in my output, but I'm going to move on to some examples. So LA Eco Village is an amazing urban intentional cooperative built on ecological principles in its 32nd year on the ground. When recruiting members, residents ensure the co-op stays diverse across age, ethnicity, gender, household composition, and income levels. A land trust helps to ensure permanent affordability for residents. Residents told me that the Eco Village, which does a huge amount to support and educate the local community, is a haven of mutual aid, and it sits within the context of an anonymous and often ruthless city. Childcare is often shared here, and with their biodiversity work, it's one of the only places in Los Angeles that you can hear birds. Next, Wild Sage and Silver Sage Village in Colorado took a really innovative approach. There's 2 adjacent co-housing communities. So there's the senior specific and intergenerational living. 40% of units in both of these communities are classified as affordable. Residents describe their goal as living in a way that's more fulfilling and fun. So noting different kind of needs and expectations, for example, around activity and noise, this model provides that kind of age separation, but intergenerational integration. So it's quite different from the others. Silver Sage is an independent, not an assisted living community, but they do have processes for mutual aid and check-ins, such as a buddy system. Finally, Nightingale Village comprises 6 neighbouring buildings designed with an emphasis on social, environmental, and financial sustainability. and there's interconnection across those buildings. But I want to focus on one within it, which is called Urban Coop. It's an intentional co-housing community, but within a single apartment block. So they have multi-generational events, regular shared meals, and they govern themselves. So those are some examples, but there's going to be many more I'll share kind of in the future, but I wanted to give you a bit of an understanding of the types of places. So when was the last time that you chatted with a neighbour, lent a hand in DIY, or even stopped for a chat, stopped for a wave, asked your neighbour about a milestone in their life, for example? Perhaps some people listening are in a fortunate minority and you've developed bonds along your street. But for many of us in Western society, especially urban environments, the art of neighbouring has faded. And I believe that with it, we've lost a really priceless social currency. Visiting these communities was powerful. I personally had many beautiful interactions and moments of community care, including getting my car jump started in the morning in the pouring rain twice. But I've started to use this term neighbourisms to describe these everyday acts of support, of care, of interest that are flourishing in these communal living environments, yet remain rare in broader society. I don't want these tiny gestures, these neighbourisms, to be minimised because they're powerful. Whether it's returning misdelivered post, dog sitting, checking in on hard times, these neighbourisms create trust, they create belonging, and they create security. And these are all hallmarks of a resilient society. So what is it that enables these communities to thrive and to become more than just housing? Here are some building blocks. I'm just going to whip through it quickly, but it will be in my output. And they're not exhaustive or prescriptive, but these are things I've learned. So at the bottom there, underlying all of it is this resource security and sustainable policy foundations. And this kind of policy financial side can be, the most difficult to get. Next, physical foundation. So accessible, flexible spaces that enable connection, but respect privacy and work for all of the different age stages of life. Social infrastructure, rhythms, rituals, agreements, especially around food, conflict resolution, decision-making. And at the top there, ensuring there's a sense of collective purpose, belonging, and embracing change. And of course, ensuring that every generation is included across the board. So clearly, having a mix of generations is absolutely critical for the success of many of these models. One co-housing resident said to me, if I lived in a senior community, it would drive me mad. No matter how crazy it can get here, having kids around is enlivening and invigorating. And time again, every community I go to, it's the intergenerational aspect that comes up as so important. So I'm just going to finish now with some big questions, huge questions that I think these communities invite us to consider. How is it that we want to live and age? How can we design for longevity instead of designing in these inherently short-term, age-segregated ways by default? Why are so many of us so dissatisfied with our housing arrangements and lack of social connection? There is no one answer, but there is a rich spectrum of ways that our housing could offer us social connection. And there's pioneers abroad and in the UK making this reality, bringing people together across age groups in a permanent way. We have an opportunity with the government pledging many more homes to rethink not just what we build, but how we live together and how we rebuild generational ties. I know that was super quick whistle-stop tour, but you can find lots more on my website, thinkitforward.net. And if you subscribe there, you'll get my output in the summer. I'd love to stay in touch with anyone who's listening and collaborate on opportunities. So please do get in touch. Thank you for your attention.
Savannah, what a really great way to kick off our happy hour series. A really brilliant presentation, and I really like what you've been talking about in terms of that neighbourism. It reminds me of some of the sort of work on neighborliness and building neighborhoods. But I think what I got out of your presentation was a couple of words, that collective purpose, the connectivity, building those rhythms of life I think you talked about. And I think this really lends itself beautifully on to what Emily's going to share about those rhythms of life in terms of isolation, loneliness, thinking about how we tackle that and build a value base around this to really say that intergenerational living is a core part of all our lives. So Emily, I'm going to ask you to follow that, but I'm sure you can eloquently.
Nice segue though, I liked that. Thank you very much. Let me just put my screen sharing on as well. Amazing. Can everyone see that? Great. Huge thank you to HousingLIN, Jeremy and Telly for inviting me to be part of this conversation. And Savannah, I just love the presentation and all of those kind of nuanced examples. I think, that's where the learning and inspiration really comes from. My name is Emily Abbot. I am a Programme Director for Intergenerational Music Making and co-founder of Intergenerational England. I also have a background in global development and ethnomusicology. And I just want to spend this time to kind of ground a little bit around what we believe intergenerational approaches and understanding really is and how it can play a key role in what happens next. So in terms of who we are as an organisation, Intergenerational England is a national not-for-profit, and we're really dedicated to advancing intergenerational practice and understanding and strategy through advocacy, research and systematic change. As a strategic body, we really champion this intergenerational approach that encourages connections between generations and sectors to address societal challenges, from loneliness to economic disparity to age segregation. And for us, our theory of change is really simple. It's about embedding these intergenerational ways of thinking and commissioning and building into the current system and into communities so that we can support people in every day. We can strengthen emotional and economic well-being across the life course and reduce reliance on reactive public services. And for us, there's kind of some key principles that underpin our intergenerational thinking. One being that human connection, so building the intergenerational support systems within a local place, within a neighbourhood, and how do you enhance and encourage those relationships. The second, really understanding in intersectionality. For us, age is one aspect of something so much bigger. Our identity is where we live and where we go to school and our background and religion and belief system. And so really recognizing that a person is so much more than their age, but also therefore so much more than where they live or where they work, and really understanding that intersectionality at every level. We take a life course approach, so trying to destigmatize the way that intergenerational is often presented, which is those two ends of the spectrum, and recognize it as a model that is inclusive of all of us. So from birth right through to end of life, how we evolve through life and that dynamic of aging, but really that continuum of care. And the fourth is the intergenerational integrated partnerships, which I touched on there. But, when we look at a person and their housing, how do you really understand how a person lives if you don't work in partnership at a local level? So having around the table transport and health and the GPs and the education service and the social prescribers to really understand a person's journey and how we can best support them. Our three pillars in Intergenerational England are health, housing and the workforce, and those are underpinned by research and policy. Savannah touched on it there, but demographically we're shifting, we're changing, we are an aging population, we're living a lot longer, we're living healthier lives, but there's a language and there's a kind of perception that's being fed to us through the media, through politics, or through these silos that are very embedded within our day-to-day life, that are perpetuating this divide between ages. And it's something that we're seeing from a community level right through to a government level. Current housing models are really enforcing this separation between generations. The ONS reported in 2023 that 30% of all households, people do live alone. And these realities mean that we need to find solutions in the spaces between and the community around to promote intergenerational interaction and these support networks. We know that there is an appetite for more age-integrated living, and that there's a huge spectrum of what that looks like, from the communal housing models that Savannah talked about to those intentional neighbourisms that we can all do day to day. And it's finding that place and that responsibility and where that sits. And for us, this exclusion of intergenerational thinking within housing is quite detrimental to feeding into these divides and causing more issues on the public service and on loneliness and the mental health crisis that we're seeing. And so for us, it was really important to try and reposition this. And we know that to do that, we need evidence, we need research, people need to understand the benefits of this. So about a year ago, we connected with HACT and SNG and Clarion to really develop a new way of measuring the social value of intergenerational activities within housing. The project focused on exploring and evidencing the social value of this kind of work, but was part of a broader mission to build a more inclusive and connected communities through purposeful intergenerational collaboration. And this was really a response to growing recognition across sectors. So we would convene housing and health and care and local government to really unpick where intergenerational approaches and where this kind of lens could sit within existing social structures and how it could respond to a lot of the issues that we see, like mistrust or social fragmentation, age-based division. And we wanted to understand and define the wide range of approaches and how this could be applied across a variety of housing and community settings. So we undertook a two-phase review. The first was really to understand the national and international landscape. So what could we learn? And I think that's a really key point just to bring in here, is that this the intergenerational way of living is not new. It's something Western-wise we've lost and something that we need to now intentionally rebuild. But there was a huge amount of evidence from our European partners and internationally around where this kind of work was being embedded within design, within architectural development, within community building. And then the second phase is we directly spoke to stakeholders, so through interviews and focus groups, including with housing providers and architects and GPs, youth leaders, community organisations and residents, to understand where the gaps were and where this would fit into what's already happening. And from that came a range of definitions. I won't go through them all, but they are published in the report, which is open now, so go and have a read. But as I mentioned, there is this huge sliding scale of what intergenerational housing looks like and what it feels like and how it can be adopted within current practices, from purpose-built to strategic housing allocations to public space and facilitating connection intentionally to these cross-sector connections. So yeah, it's a real sliding scale. And for us, it was about embedding this way of working right through the layers of society. So from that human connection to neighbourhood relationships, right through to system change, and how do we encourage legislations around building intergenerationally and embedding intergenerational design principles within current designs. And as Savannah said, you know, the current government are set to build 1.5 million homes before the end of term. We've got the new towns policy. So how do we now, with these new opportunities on the horizon, start to integrate this thinking right at the core of design and development? We really took some contextual considerations. So again, that link between home building and community building. We looked at links between public health and the influence of health and housing and that relationship on local government and national government and system perspectives. We looked at the health perspective, again, social connection being a key part of how we live healthy lives, how we flourish and live for longer. And the fact that we know that loneliness is on the rise and is a huge social issue. So how do we integrate this thinking into the NHS long-term plan and really articulate the way that intergenerational housing can feed into that agenda? And then also how it linked in with community cohesion and could provide guidance for local authority and placemaking initiatives. And what we found was there was, again, a compelling evidence and layers of benefit. So for us, starting with that individual impact, reducing isolation and loneliness, increased sense of belonging to place and to people, increased sense of mutual support and assistance, so that reduction of use on formal statutory services and actually more reliance on your neighbourhood and your community, skill sharing and learning, and the overarching positive impact on mental and physical health. The impacts on neighbourhoods and local communities, so again, fostering belonging, sense of place, cooperation and shared responsibilities, which reduce mistrust and build civic responsibility back into a space, reduction on formal social services and reducing ageism. And then for society, the healthier societal transformations, the greater cohesion and civic participation. And they all obviously feed into one another and sit together. So as we went on this journey, we really wanted to kind of outline the enablers and the challenges along the way. So for us, there are a multitude of enablers, and these are just a couple, but again, we've outlined this in the report. But really, you know, understanding careful planning and design, that flexibility and adaptability. So for developers, you know, the diverse portfolio of homes and opportunity to build for the life course and build for all ages. The positive stories that come from this, so that shifting of narrative. This is a cultural narrative and a public narrative that we're seeing in the newspapers and online, and actually how does housing and infrastructure play a role in shifting that narrative. The co-design opportunities, so building with people, with place in mind, and making sure that we cater for diversity of need, and careful design and delivery of services activities within a space and place. Some of the challenges, like everything, the financial support and building the case for financial support, national and local policy support. For us, you know, it goes beyond the intervention and beyond the localized delivery of intergenerational projects, but actually how do you build this into planning policy? And for that, you know, the people at the top need to really understand the role that this can play in meeting and achieving many of the agendas that we see. A dedicated task force to oversee the implementation of age-friendly policies. So having this sit within, you know, being dedicated and being rooted in responsibility. At the moment, we see a lot of the silos of older people and younger people, and there isn't something that is grounding it down into, you know, age-friendly, inclusive, intergenerational responsibility. And fear of not bringing people together, so fueled by misconceptions, that ageism that is internal and both external, that kind of feeds into all of our decision making. For us, we do see this as the beginning. From the report, we've developed an impact framework, which we're now in a test and trial phase, and really believe could help improve outcomes like mental health, civic participation, reduction of health service demand, enhance community safety and cohesion, so reduction in crime, and perception across age groups. It's designed to be flexible and adaptable across contexts, right from design architecture through to operations and day-to-day interaction. We're at a stage where we're looking to engage with partners to pilot the impact framework across diverse living and housing settings. We're sharing findings with policymakers and you know, hosting roundtables to really, again, embed this thinking right at the forefront of our minds. We're supporting ICSs and local authorities to really start to embed this within their practices, and scaling our Talking Generations campaign, which is sitting alongside this to encourage dialogue at every level, and to encourage this within the conversation. So I hope that was, I mean, huge whistle stop, and you know, there's lots in the report, but do go and read the report. Hopefully it's been popped in the chat for you to go and link to. And if you're interested in finding out any more or being part of the next stage, we have a dedicated housing task force that are feeding into this and helping develop thinking and integrate understanding across their network. So do get in touch if you would like to find out any more. And thank you very much.
Emily, well, great. And that was a wonderful sort of follow-on from Savannah. And I think, again, some really important things I think you touched on there. I was very struck by the intersectionality that you talked about, and I think that will relate very heavily to what Cate's going to be talking about shortly. They've done a lot of work looking at the intersectionality of age and disability across Stirling University's work on the ISPA project. And also, again, that's sort of building on the neighbourism and what you talked about in terms of thinking not just about the social space, but also the physical space. And that also will be something that Sam will touch on in his presentation, and Cate as well, a little bit as well. So what wonderful. And I see that Sally's put several links up already in the chat. So great to see some fantastic resources available already. So and more to come, I know. So without further ado, we're going to welcome Cate Pemble from the University of Stirling. Cate is no stranger to our happy hours, so welcome back. And you're going to talk about a different project this time, which has some real relationship building across Scotland, so in particular. So we're taking a national and international flavour for sure. So up to you, Cate.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Let me just flip myself over here. So I'm going to be talking today a little bit From some of the work we've been doing, yes, coming forward from the old Designing Homes for Healthy Cognitive Aging project, which if you're coming to HAPPI Hour is quite a bit you might have heard about, but a new project looking at changing intergenerational relationships. So this is us really starting to build on some of the more wider neighborhood, wider context, wider community aspects of intergenerational living. And for the purposes of having a catchy title, I've gone ahead and called this The Post of the Practice and the Potential. So let's try clicking the correct button at the right time. Thinking about intergenerational research, we've heard a number of takes here today already, which has been fantastic. It's important to recognise that a lot of research happening in this space at the moment comes from a lot of different disciplines, but at its core, especially if it's academic research, it's all starting with the same question. And that question is always going to be, what is it that we ourselves mean when we say intergenerational? It's going to form how we write bids for funding, who we even apply to for funding. It's going to impact who gives us that fund, who gets in partnership with us, who gets involved in the work with us as participants.
Sorry, Kate, to interrupt.
Yes.
So sorry, do you mind if I share your slides from my end? I think yours are slightly blurry for a couple of people.
Okay, 1 second. I can probably also do it here if that would be helpful.
Fantastic, thank you.
Let me do that for you, dear. Let's do that. Is that a little better?
Perfect.
Everyone
Brilliant.
has to
Thank you
promise to
so
ignore the
much.
spot that would have had my camera in it. But otherwise, let's continue. So fundamentally, it is just recognizing where we start with these questions. And what tends to happen, this is a little bit of a mea culpa from academia to start, is we tend to fall into really three major traps when we do this. One is, and I think Emily mentioned this already, falling into the extremes when we look at the two age extremes, the very young and the very old. And if you have watched particular pieces of TV media, you might have watched young people going into care homes and things like that. Another one that we tend to focus on is very curated interactions, specific interventions, groups that are set up specifically for the purpose of doing intergenerational connections and growing intergenerational relationships in response to usually a problem or an activity that they want to undertake. And then the last kind of bucket that we tend to fall in tends to be around intergenerational families, so often tracking within one biological family over time and over generations. The issue with that is what goes unsaid and what goes unseen in that kind of work. Because in fact, intergenerational research is messy. And as we go forward with the Changing Intergenerational Relationships project I'm doing now, it becomes messier, and that's a good thing. Because while the specific activities that we do and the specific spaces that we create are places where we do intergenerational work, they're not the only place. And Savannah really picked up on some of those nice moments when she was speaking earlier in terms of helping jumpstart cars and who's going to look in on children and things like this. A lot of those day-to-day mundane practices get lost. And they get lost sometimes because as researchers we're focusing on particular things and they don't fall inside that very neat tidy box. But a lot of times they fall between the cracks because people think they're too silly or too normal or not special enough to mention when we come around and ask the questions. So sometimes that can get in the way of working out exactly how are our intergenerational communities working and how can we support them to do better. If we're thinking then in this kind of intergenerational messiness rather than the neat little boxes that we're used to, we end up with some different questions. One is, what are we missing when we make our nice neat little boxes? One is, what is disrupting these natural spontaneous moments of connection and what's disrupting them? Who's getting a seat at this intergenerational table and who isn't? And it was lovely to hear Emily bring up intersectionality for this reason, because often the marginalized groups that we are working with are exactly the people who won't be included in intergenerational work as often. And then asking questions about how do wider forces pull together and shape this intergenerational work that we do and how we think about intergenerational communities going forwards. Now, there are many, many ways to do good intergenerational research. The way that we are doing it on the Changing Intergenerational Relationships project is just one way. So for us, we're very, very lucky. We have quite a long timeline. We started in 2023, we're going up through 2027. And we're going to look at 4 different topics over that time. We're looking at changing working practices, which was our first theme and is just coming to its end now. Intergenerational living, which is capturing a lot of the kind of housing and design elements that Emily was just talking about and that Savannah was talking about earlier. We're going to pick up on digital access and exclusion. And then the last one we're going to pick up on is around access to health and social care across the life course. So very small, niche topics to look at. We're looking at these because these factors tend to have quite strong intergenerational elements. And we're looking at these in the context of one particular space. For us, that is Stirlingshire and Clackmannanshire. For those who aren't familiar, Stirlingshire has some incredibly affluent areas, not exclusively, but quite a lot of them, Stirling City being one of them. And Clackmannanshire is one of the smallest regions in Scotland and has some of the highest rates of deprivation there. So they're 2 really contrasting areas if you choose to look at them that way. For every single theme, we start off by doing 40 life history interviews. That means interviewing people about their experience, for example, with work, which is what I'm pulling from for this presentation today. But instead of saying, don't tell me about your childcare, don't tell me about the bus routes, don't tell me about these things, it's looking about work in context. So I absolutely do need to know about how your childcare affects it. I absolutely do need to know what the bus routes do to the jobs that you can have, right? Looking at these things in context, picking up on that messiness as we go forwards. We then roll into community workshops, which is an opportunity for us to pull out the places of disagreement that we find in research, because funnily enough, there's quite a few when you interview 40 people about a topic, and throwing them back at people as questions. Some people say, the only way to get a good job is to go to university. Other people say, it's a scam. What do you think? Please discuss. And then asking them what they want in their communities. What, if we fixed all of these things, if we had a vibrant intergenerational community, what would that look like? And then in the final phase, asking them about what kinds of resources would they like to see come out of this work? What kind of doors should we be knocking on to share our findings? This is really, really important because it lets us pick up on a couple of things. One is the sheer scale and map of the kind of connections people have that often go missing, or go missed rather. And the other is the sheer number of things that can put pressure on and shape these relationships. Everything from global events like COVID, to digital technology, to local history, to opportunities, all of these things moving and shaking and putting pressure on our relationships in different ways that can often go unnoticed unless we're allowing people to talk in context. Now, I'm afraid to say that the findings, just to give you a quick highlight, are, as often with social science, a bit of a downer. So I love a good meme, but unfortunately, none of these are memeable. And in fact, we would suggest you meme with caution going forwards, because while it can sometimes seem like people talking from different generations, especially if they're talking about kind of hot topics like work or work ethic, seem to have completely different perspectives, they're often using different maps to navigate the same kind of terrain. So something has changed, the world around me is changing, and I'm making sense of it in a particular way. So even when people seem to have very different views on what work ethic is and what one generation's work ethic is over another, and whether it's good or bad, they're often pulling on different ideas about what role work should play in their life, how their work and life balance should look, what rewards even should come from the work that they do, and what success even looks like. These are big foundational questions that can really fuel some of those conversational divides that we end up getting into when we do intergenerational work and we're having real messy intergenerational conversations. And we're starting to pick up on them now as a project. So that being time up, I will say thank you so much for your time. Do please meme with caution going forward. And thank you.
Hey, that was wonderful. Thanks very much for giving the highlights of that programme. Lots of really interesting things to digest. And I was also struck how some of the things that Emily was talking about, those sort of pillars of the foundations of intergenerational England, you also highlighted as sort of outcomes that are sort of coming through from the work in Clackmannanshire and Stirling. So what great sort of connectivity there. And I love the stuff you were talking about in terms of thinking both spatially in terms of place, but also at home in terms of space as well. And I think that's what we'll probably come and hear a little bit more about from when we come on to Sam in a minute. But just to connect with Sam, he probably won't mind me saying, but I think, Sam, the work you're going to be describing has also been shortlisted for a regional Stirling Prize from REBA. So congratulations. So from University of Stirling to a shortlisted Stirling Prize, over to you, Sam.
Well, it's not quite shortlisted for the Stirling Prize just yet, but it's a
putting my
regional
money on
one.
it.
I like the segue anyway. That's fantastic. Okay, thanks everybody. I'm just going to share my screen.
Yeah, thanks, Kate.
Can everybody see that okay? Not blurry and things. Fantastic. Brilliant. My name's Sam Goss. I'm the founding director of Barefoot Architects. We're based in Bristol and Totnes, and we've sort of specialised in community-led housing and co-housing projects over the last 11 years. We've been fortunate enough to work with a real variety of groups, and we founded the practice on the basis of Bridport co-housing. And so I'm going to really kind of talk on that today, which we refer to as a place to grow. And I'm going to put a link in the chat to a little document about it that you can download for more information, because this is going to be a real whistle stop. So for those of you who don't know, Bridport, unlike stated in the Observer article, is actually in Dorset, in West Dorset, small town, a sort of Saxon market town. And Hazelmead, as the project is now known, is within the area of outstanding natural beauty. The project is the sort of culmination of 15, 16 years worth of work. And I think some interesting sort of points about it are that it's going to be, well, it is 100% affordable in perpetuity. It's really well connected to the town. It's got this fantastic sort of green infrastructure. Interestingly, it's next to an NHS hospital. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that and how the project has been able to provide affordable houses for NHS staff, key workers in the town who just simply couldn't afford to live, because Bridport is this sort of wonderful coastal town, and house prices are hugely escalated to sort of 11 times local income as a result of sort of second home ownership, tourism, etc. Things we're very common with, aware of. A kind of incredible group of people that crowdfunded the purchase of the land through a share offer, and it's really kind of is a place of growth of the town, come about through some really strong and crucial partnerships. I think that's a really important piece to sort of take away. How on earth do these projects happen? They're through deep partnership. Now it is such an extraordinary project driven by a group of pioneer residents who came together from as early as 2008, really looking to address the problem in the town of a shortage of affordable, sustainable housing, that they wanted to be much more neighbourly as well. An idea around co-housing had been planted by a local entrepreneur, and a group coalesced around this, really wanting to do something quite exceptional. It was very difficult to get planning permission for at the time, but it was granted by a unanimous committee decision. And now it is the largest co-housing project in the UK by one home, and provides 53 homes. And I think what I've often said is, in order to get exceptional outcomes, you do need an exceptional approach, which I think this is. So I think the foundation of this sort of community group didn't begin when we were involved, but I think we helped facilitate a really deep co-design process with the initial residents, who, it's fair to say, were a group of about 24, 25 people, some of whom were principally older and had the opportunity, I would say, through their own time and personal resources to invest in quite in-depth workshops, meetings, etc., in order to be able to be involved in the project. But I think what they always did was had real foresight and imagination to sort of put themselves in their own position when they were younger and had younger families, to anticipate how could this be a really intergenerational, successful community. And I think they were hugely ambitious, and in so doing, really set out to address some of these core problems that we see in the UK of this epidemic of loneliness, which really is across generations. It isn't targeted to any one demographic age group at all. I think the community land trust that they formed as part of their community benefit society and the sociocratic form of governance they have, I also think is really fundamental to the success of the project and the intergenerational relationships that arise as a result of it, because everybody through the governance model is empowered to have a voice through consent-based decision making. So some principles around co-housing, for those of you who maybe don't know, it's this alternative way of developing housing in intentional neighbourhood and communities, arising out of sort of Denmark in the 1970s. As I said, it's intentionally designed with people, and you have this balance of the provision of both private spaces and shared common facilities, such as a common house where people might come together for shared meals, activities, parties, such and so forth. One of the other fundamental principles, which I believe from a design perspective really supports social interaction and relational design, is pushing the car parking to the perimeter of the site, creating car-free streets and putting the common house and the shared spaces right in the middle of the development. Co-housing, I think it's really important as well to say, actually, as a model, what it's doing is embedding this collective control and stewardship from residents into the long-term maintenance, management and meeting structure for how the development is run. And I'm going to say it again, sociocracy here really is empowering all those voices. And it's important also to note that actually co-housing, it is an inclusive, not gated community. It is part of the wider neighbourhood. It's connected, it's open on both sides. And in this sense, in this particular site, it is well bounded by the field. Now, I mean, just touching on a little bit about the particular design of HazelMead, it's a mixture of 2, 3 and 4 bed houses in terraces, all facing south for energy efficiency, and some 1-bedroom apartments at the south end of the site where they're closer to car parking. Another thing I'm just going to touch on that I think is quite unique to HazelMead is that it's also got a community microgrid, which means that the entire south-facing roofscape is covered with PV panels. I think what's important about that is that it's really helping to address fuel poverty by providing cheap electricity, which is provided by an energy supply company as a subsidiary of the Community Land Trust. And I think the residents' stories around their previous homes of living in a kind of feudal system where the only way of heating their home was through burning wood and chopping wood, they were permanently having to spend their time heating their homes rather than being able to enjoy relationships. Some of the sort of key lessons from HazelMead I'm just going to touch on before going through a few stories. I think I'm really interested in establishing and trying to quantify the overall social value that this has provided, because it feels anecdotally so far as if people really are dealing with loneliness. People care about each other here. There's a massive value in that, which I think we do need to bring into how we explain this story to others in order that we hope that we can get high enough upstream for more funding for it. I think one of the other takeaways is that these community groups being more affordable, more neighbourly, more sustainable, they're also more ambitious. I think groups of people coming together, they want better. They aspire to much higher standards environmentally and socially than a normative development would ever give. So I think we need to entrust them. I think we need to give much more power to people to enable them to take the risks that they themselves are happy to, like creating car-free streets to not park their cars outside their homes. And I think what's fascinating is that although many of the projects we work on are really, really challenging sites, such as this, where it's an area of outstanding natural beauty, the local authority resists them, and now they see it as a flagship for the delivery of affordable, sustainable housing. So I think we really need to be brave. I think we need to be bold, and I think we need to understand that when we do so, change can happen, because the stories that I'm now going to share are that HazelMead really has created a place where people describe themselves as growing and thriving at all ages and stages of life. And so my provocation is, why doesn't every town and village and city in the UK have one? And there are many reasons for that. So I'm going to share some, snippets of kind of people's stories here. I think what's been amazing about one of the partnerships with the NHS, and it was a hard-fought partnership to provide access over a ransom strip. But I think the win-win negotiation that they formed is that 6 of the houses are now dedicated for NHS nurses who work on the hospital immediately adjacent to this. And that's brought in this absolutely wonderful kind of multicultural mix that otherwise simply wouldn't have existed in this area of West Dorset. And the families living there have, integrated brilliantly and are really, benefiting each other. There are allotment gardens that are opposite all of people's houses. And what we see is that every time I go there are working parties growing food. And this idea and title of the project, As a Place to Grow, I think it really comes from how the group actually coalesced initially around sharing food production on an allotment, which they still keep off-site. And they really do this. And this isn't the mother of these children. The car-free streets, I think it's impossible to overestimate how powerful it is to take cars away from our roadways. And when you do that, I do believe that there is a sense that the streets here are carefree. People are having more conversations, they are meeting, they are playing, and they're making those little connections, as has been described in another report, that it support the growth and success of the community here. The more residents we've spoken with and interviewed, the more it's become clear that literally everybody on this site, so there are over 100 residents, everybody knows everybody by name and by face. And they do this because they're consistently growing food together, they're eating together in terraces, they're partying and playing together. They don't all get along, as well. It's not true to say that some people don't like each other as much as they like other people. It's not all rosy. But they really are helping each other to live together. One of the other kind of really simple features of the design is that every house has a solar shading canopy outside the front of these big windows with a bench, and people sit out there, and it means that they're front gardens with no boundaries except for the plants and the swales that deal with rainwater on the site entail that people are sitting outside their front gardens talking to people as they pass on the streets. As I mentioned, it's extraordinary the extent to which the adults here kind of co-parent the children. And I think there are many examples of some of the individual circumstances where this is profoundly impactful for kids with disabilities and parents who we know are kind of increasingly strained to work to survive. They're described by some of the residents as being feral. I mean, I've nicely put free range. They've also got and maintained on the site this incredible wild space at the top where they've grown an orchard. And what's obvious every time we go there is that they have the room to breathe, to find peace, to relax, to play, and also to gather together around a fire pit where they can have celebrations, etc. I think it's important to point out that, this isn't a replacement for a properly functioning social care system, but what we do see is that people are socially caring about each other in a way which is really quite powerful. So Lynn, one of the residents, on the day before she was going to move in, injured herself and was in hospital, sent a text message to the co-housing group, and within hours, a group of people had popped round to her house, taken all the boxes, moved them into her house. And when she came back from hospital the next day, her new home was set up based upon a plan that she'd given them. And she said she barely even knew those people at that time. And that's the power of an intergenerational community here. The extent to which they're also involved in the kind of management and maintenance through the Community Land Trust and how they have to retain responsibility by committing to 2 hours a week, I think is really important. And it's worth pointing out, this is a site of very complex mixed tenure, but 50% socially rented and 50% shared ownership. And when people opt in, they have to opt in and sign up to the charter, if you like, of the local lettings policy and of the land trust, committing to spend 2 hours a week being involved in the community. As I said, that the homes, because of the residents' ambitions, they are built to higher standards. And there's this kind of fine balance between having private rear gardens and private rear spaces and a much more public front gardens and also the communal areas that they have and will have once the common house is built. And in an interview the other week, I thought it was a really nice way of framing it around co-housing. People can have their cake and eat it, you know, i.e. they do have privacy and they have communality. And I think what's coming across in many of the interviews we've been doing is that, you know, it's enabling people to live here who are working people, but have a very low income and simply wouldn't be able to afford to live in any other way. And in so doing, it's kind of creating this really rich and diverse community of ages and stages where people are really thriving. Judith, for example, she's the one that was having to chop wood just to stay warm. And she describes how now she is effortlessly warm. And that's given her the balance in life to dedicate to other people, including her daughter and grandchild, rather than just creating heat to survive. So this is a net zero carbon, car-free, all-electric, mutually supportive, multi-generational, affordable co-housing formed by a community land trust. And I'll say it again, why doesn't every village, town and city have one? Thank you.
Sam, thanks. Really great presentation. And in fact, it has been a crescendo, as I said earlier, of examples. We kicked off earlier with some international examples, Savannah, setting out a framework. Emily built on that framework, talked around the social impact and social value. Cate has shared some of the work around the work in Scotland, those really important things around relationships. And you've built that relationship to not just look at the social architecture, but the physical architecture, but then coming back to the social and giving some real great personal stories. We got about a minute and we got 4 or 5 questions in the chat, and Savannah, you had some really big strategic structural questions as well. I'm afraid we're probably not going to have a chance to go through everything, but let's just do through a few questions that are in the Q&A box. And Debbie's asked a couple. One was really around planning, and I think Jim also touches on planning as well in his question. So Sam, if I could kick off with you, do you just want to sort of highlight some of the issues around planning? You talked about getting planning permission and some of the sort of the group's activities around that. Any further thoughts in relation to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need more policy strengthening around community-led housing, which, you know, we've now got in the NPPF, the paragraphs that at least acknowledge and identify what that is and how it can be used to provide affordable housing on exception sites. I think that's really important bit of legislation, and I think we need to use it more. I think we definitely need, you know, wider recognition of community-led housing and co-housing, and again, I take it back to that, the demonstration of its social value, and as necessary to financialize that in order that we can communicate how powerful it is to local authorities and government, in order that they can see the downstream benefits of some upstream investment are overwhelmingly worthwhile, and that not only is that good for the public, but it creates joyful places where human beings are actually thriving. And I would say it's only because people don't have the choice to opt into it that they're not able to choose it. And when afforded the opportunity to have it, they do.
Savannah, was planning an issue when some of the communities you visited, or was it very much naturally occurring bottom up?
Yes, definitely was. And I think the main thing that I always get asked, you know, well, what's the trick? How do you make it work? And it was, out of the 53 communities, a different story for every community. So that there is no specific way, especially, you know, in somewhere like the States, where it'll be different from state to state as well. But I will say that I think when it comes to planning, there are a lot of levers out there, and I think to making change, and I think that some of the levers there's kind of levers around policy, there's levers around potentially financial incentives on a national level, then there's levers around knowledge and culture and what we're doing here, and in the narrative and the media, changing cultures around how we think about housing, moving beyond that white picket fence idea, narratives around retirement. And I saw someone put in the chat a question about what local authorities can do, and I'd be happy to talk to that person, because I think there are things, you know, there's supplementary planning documents that can be created, that there are things and there are opportunities, but yeah, the planning story is different in every community.
Well, somebody observed that we are dragging on, but I think the richness of the conversation enables us to just do a couple more minutes, and then we'll draw this to a close. A couple of questions, perhaps for Emily and Cate. Elizabeth Mills, who many of you will know used to be the Director of Research into Ageing and Chair of Home Share International, talks about whether home share has a place amongst this, and can that be built into the work. So Emily, any thoughts about work of home sharing?
Yeah, I think it's an important part of the puzzle, and I think that's what it is. It's such a sliding scale of sort of the intentionality behind design and behind communities, retrofitting and what that looks like, and then development models. And I think there's the intergenerational framework and model is so adaptable and so diverse in just how it can be used. That home share plays such a role in that, but alongside, you know, affordable housing and community building and local infrastructure, and it's all of it. It's everything. So yeah, I think in a nutshell, home share is one part of what is quite a big and intersectional, intergenerational puzzle.
And Cate, any final thoughts around that as well?
No, I think it's absolutely accurate. I think the thing is always going to be acknowledging that we're not going to find the perfect silver bullet, the perfect one answer that's going to apply to all of these communities. So every community that's going to come along is going to have its own rich history and its own people who have lived there. And we know from some of the stuff that we've found, it's not just having the housing space, it's how do people feel like they belong there? How do they feel like part of that community? How do they feel connected? So we need to kind of move the needle on a lot of different things all at the same time, which is worth doing, but it makes it's a messy process, but it's a worthwhile process.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and you know, it's a really diverse neighbourhoods, diverse communities we operate in, and you know, we need to make sure that we just don't look at it through the lens of a white middle class sort of focus, so to speak. Hey, look, this has been a fantastic discussion. I know that we could go on for another half an hour at least, but on a personal level, can I thank Savannah, Emily, Cate, and Sam for 4 wonderful presentations. The slide, the chats, the conversation will be sent out to all delegates today, tomorrow, or the day after. When we bring this session to a close, you'll be asked to just complete a little feedback form. If you could do so, that'd be great, because that helps us plan the next session. Emily touched on an organisation called Sovereign Network Group, who are part of the social impact work with HACT. In fact, Sarah Mitten is one of our guest speakers next week from SNG, when we're looking at the housing preferences of older people and the work they're doing from both the governance engaging with their communities and their resident groups, as well as thinking about some of the work that Alice Walker has been doing at Oxford Brookes University, thinking about how housing decisions are made in later life. And I think issues around intergenerational living and people wanting to have that type of living will also be interesting. So if you're interested in that, please join us next week for our next happy hour session. But for now, can I thank you all for your fantastic presentations and for the great questions and chat in the box, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks everybody.
Thank you. Great to see you all.
Bye-bye.
Well done.